Welcome. Welcome to Christian Theological Seminary's lifelong learning webinar series titled Navigating a Disorienting Age. At CTS, we are committed to nurturing an academic community that embodies God's liberative, restorative, and life-affirming message. As we celebrate our 100th anniversary this year, we are excited to continue this vision alongside all of you. Today's webinar is part of our lifelong learning series called Our Life in Common. This series offers valuable perspectives and resources for navigating the challenges of our time, cultivating resilience, connection, and growth within our communities. In today's webinar, we will explore the intersection of spirituality and mental wellness, help, harm, and healing. Our guests will guide us in discussion about how spirituality can both support and challenge mental wellness practices, providing insights for personal growth and community healing. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Francisco Lozada, Vice President and Dean of the Faculty here at CTS. I'm especially excited to have our guest speaker with us today, thanks to the recommendation of our wonderful faculty member and co-host, Dr. Christina Jones-Davis. Speaking of Dr. Davis, she will now take a moment to introduce herself and our esteemed guest, Dr. Ayo Yetunde. Christina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lozada, and hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Christina Jones-Davis. I currently serve as the Assistant Professor of Marriage and Family Therapy and Pastoral Theology at CTS within our School of Counseling. I'm so delighted to be joining this conversation today with my longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Pamela Ayo Yetunde. Ayo is a pastoral counselor. She is a writer, and her current fictional story and film project is titled Songbird Birdsong, The Story. It's about exploring spiritual and mental wellness in a future time of national disorientation. What a deeply resonating and compelling topic for this time that we have today. Ayo is also the author of Casting Indra's Net and Dearly Beloved, Prince Spirituality, and This Thing Called Life. Welcome, Ayo. It's such a pleasure to be sitting here and sharing space with you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina, and happy 100 years. Wow, that's amazing. I'm glad to be here and be part of this celebration with you all.
Yes. And, we have touched base over the years, and I know that even as you so graciously accepted the invitation to be here today, you asked a very compelling question yesterday as we were chatting about, why a Buddhist practitioner to lend perspective on a topic such as this one. And I wonder if you could just start there and talk to us a little bit about your own spiritual practices. I said a bit about CTS's values regarding inner religious dialogue and how much that is important to us and is lived out in our community. But tell us a little bit about how it informs your approach to mental wellness, help, healing, and harm.
Thank you. Well, first I want to say that I grew up in the United Methodist Church. And I have attended a variety of Christian communities over my lifetime, including the Episcopal Church, Lutheran Adult Sunday School, Quaker meetings for a couple of years. And so I consider myself to be an interfaith, pan-Buddhist universalist. And by that I mean, if it sounds true, if it sounds wise, if it sounds helpful, I'm very likely to incorporate that and try to apply it regardless of the tradition. Because mostly what I'm concerned about as a Buddhist practitioner are the causes of our suffering, and the ways to diminish or mitigate or eliminate suffering. So that's across the board, no matter the Buddhist school a person's coming from, it's very likely those two things are going to be in operation: an interest in the causes of suffering and an interest in how to minimize the impact of that suffering. And so when I asked you the question, why would a Christian seminary invite a Buddhist practitioner in to talk about healing, mental health, and harm? It's not, in my experience, that many Christian entities reach out to Buddhists for dialogue. And I have done a lot of work to try to promote interfaith, interreligious dialogue between Christians and Buddhists, because I think we share a lot of core values. And I also think that the things that we differ on can also inform us, because we need to work together. We all have things to share. And in this time of divisiveness, I hope that we don't forget the things that bring us together, that support one another and promote healing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, perspective around if it sounds like truth, if it has the ring of truth that our souls kind of resonate with, and we can incorporate it, we can learn from it, we can kind of seek to understand that. And as you're thinking then also about addressing suffering, this is a time where many are suffering, and just kind of the disorienting aspect of that. I wonder if you can speak a bit about how you understand, the nature of the suffering, what challenges it poses to mental wellness in the world right now. Where do you see kind of these sources of suffering and harm in the world right now?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, from a Buddhist perspective, we are taught that everything is interconnected. And so when we think about the causes of suffering, we may not be able to locate the initial cause of a particular suffering. And so with all the chaos that's in the system right now, in the world right now, I know that I can't point to one thing to say, that's the source. But I can say this: over the last several years, I have seen permission granted to believe whatever you want to believe, to create your own set of facts and operate out of your own set of facts, whether they are true or not, and whether they cause harm or not. And so I would say that source of suffering has to do with abuse of power within a political structure, the abuse of power, the repeated lies told over and over again, to where it begins to sound true and becomes someone's truth, and the lies that are told about other people. And this is what's particularly dangerous right now: to tell lies over and over again about the danger of people who you deem to be not like yourself may cause a community to preemptively strike against those people. And so I've been saying this for years, and people have been saying, "Now this is not happening in the States." It is happening in the States, that all the elements for acts of mass violence, even genocide, are in our system right now. And the question is, are we going to rely on the sources of information, disinformation, and misinformation that are so readily available, in the information age, in our artificial intelligence age, rather than our own lived experience of our neighbors, our families, our friends, and our communities. That's really the choices I think that we have before us. And I would like to invite us to trust our sense of our neighbors, our families and friends, and ourselves over what is being told about others by those in power.
Yeah, this experience of being told something over and over and over again, and beginning to believe it, even if it's not true to one's experience of their neighbor. And I'm wondering, where do you think folks can find that wherewithal and the mental kind of wellness to both cope with the onslaught of being told who someone is, and to be afraid and to distance and to kind of be us against them? What are the impacts on person's wellness, and how then can we tune into what we kind of experience of our neighbors?
Yeah. So I would like to bring in Buddhist practice here of mindfulness, to really pay attention in the moment to what it is that we're doing. What are we feeling when we reach out for the potential for misinformation, disinformation? What is this addiction that we have to this over this conversation, right? Why would I prefer to reach for this little thing with a little bit of information than reach for your hand, right? Or give you a hug, or listen to your voice? Yeah. I think part of what we need to do is divest ourselves from our addiction to technology. I'm not saying not use it at all, but ask ourselves, in our awareness of ourselves, how dependent am I on these things for defining my reality? Maybe if we just start with that question and then let the answer come, I am dependent upon this thing to define my reality. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. So let me go to the park. Let me go to the forest. Let me go take a walk with my dog. Let me be with my neighbors. Let me go to a soup kitchen. Let me go to church. Whatever it is, let me be with life and not artificial representations of what life is. And when we practice mindfulness, the hope is that we practice mindfulness without judging ourselves. So if I say, yes, I am dependent on these things for defining reality, that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that you're part of the culture. This is how it is. And now you're going to divest from that.
Yeah, I love that image of putting down the device. I mean, I've got mine handy right here as well, right? And what would
we're
it
using
mean?
one right now, yes.
And we're using one right now to interface. And so with all its, its connecting potential, also really considering what would it mean to reach out to our neighbor's hand rather than the device to connect. And I think that's such a compelling image. I'm thinking about mindfulness as a practice, and I'm wondering if you can say a bit more about what mindfulness is and does. If we're just starting out, right? Where might one begin?
Okay, yeah. mindfulness is such a powerful concept and practice. So basically, mindfulness, and when we hear about mindfulness now in culture, it has been removed from its grounding in Buddhist thought, philosophy, psychology, and ethics for the world to consume, and that's not so problematic. So, okay, let's talk about it from a secular point of view first, which is basically it's saying just be aware in the present moment. Just be aware in the present moment. Be aware of how you feel. You can practice mindfulness of the body and do a very brief scan, starting with your head or starting with your toes, and just move your attention to different parts of your body to feel whether there's tension, whether there's constriction, whether there's expansion, relaxation, pain, the absence of pain. And you can say, okay, I'm in the state of being for, and then fill in the blank. Other practices around mindfulness include our thoughts, our agitation, our peacefulness, the flow of the breath. And the purpose of mindfulness practices, again, is to be aware. And to be aware is another way of saying being in truth. For example, if I don't know if this is the best example, but let's say we're using our device and we want to know what the weather is. Really, what we're saying is we want to know the truth of the situation so I can prepare better for it, right? And so mindfulness is like that as well. I want to know the truth of myself and the context I find myself in so that I can be better prepared for it and act appropriately within it.
Can I ask a question, Christina? Yes, okay.
Absolutely.
So, this is very interesting because I've been reading this volume and I'm getting through it little by little. That it's the protagonist of the volume is recording sound, and I've been thinking about this lately, and this sort of ties in with your notion of mindfulness, of being aware of what's around you when you're out taking a walk or you're running or something along those lines. Recording in your mind the sounds that you hear around you. For me, that's how I get to the awareness. It's a more of a proactive move that I make. I guess my question would be, okay, how do we get there in this disorienting week? When I hear that now authorities can enter into churches and schools to remove people, that's a disorienting thing that it's hard for me to return back to the mindfulness. That the mindfulness seems to be focused on me. How do we help others reach that mindfulness? I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm making sense there, but
yeah, but I think I understand.
Yeah, okay.
So we have to take responsibility for our own practices. Right? We can encourage people to practice awareness. We can share how to do it. But when it comes down to it, someone has to take responsibility for their own spiritual practices and their own desire to be in the know. I remember so many times in 2015, when people told me they were not watching the news because they didn't believe certain things could happen in the United States. They didn't want to hear it. And so by checking out of the reality, when a new reality hit, they were in shock. And so part of mindfulness practices is to avoid the harm that's caused by being in shock of reality. So the question about this disorienting time, mindfulness is a way to take care of ourselves when we recognize that we ourselves are disoriented. It is a way of reorienting to ourselves. It is a way of touching into the impacts of trauma, right? Getting aware. Where am I? Who am I? How am I feeling? Where am I? Being aware. Okay, now that I have reoriented myself to the fact that things are changing, I can ask myself, what am I being called to do? And I'll just add this, as a Buddhist practitioner, we learn that at the root of all evil, you might find delusion, greed, hatred, or a combination of those things. So we run the risk, when we don't practice awareness, we run the risk of living in delusion. And when we live in delusion, we are set up to do harm.
Okay.
And that might be the inspiration. I might say, well, I don't want to be a person who's causing harm.
Mhm.
So for that reason, I'm going to practice awareness. I'm going to practice mindfulness.
Mhm. Okay. That's helpful. I think for me, it's there's part of me that, and I think this is, maybe you can respond to. I don't have an answer either, but I'm thinking of family members, friends, and people who are at the. It's great that we can practice mindfulness, but we want our mother to practice it. We want our sister to practice it. We want our neighbor to practice it. How do we not worry about them, or do we focus? If I'm hearing you, we focus first on ourselves and not worry about that. There seems to be a lot of what I hear, and this is all anecdotal. It's like, how do I get my mother to practice? Well, I don't think they would put it this way: practice mindfulness, to be aware that the thinking that they have is harmful.
Oh, okay. So I think there might be a couple of things that we're actually trying to do in that scenario.
Okay.
Okay. So one, I would say that when we become evangelists for
Mhm.
mindfulness,
Yeah.
uh, we should really be careful about what we're doing, because mindfulness is about non-judgment, right? And so is our desire to strongly encourage other people to engage in mindfulness practice based on our judgments of them? And if that's the case, then we may not be the best purveyor of mindfulness, right? We need to work on the judgment piece. That's one. Two, just because we practice mindfulness really doesn't mean that we're going to come to an agreement about what is true. So I don't want to elevate this practice to mean, enlightenment will ensue. I'm not saying that. But maybe in moments of conflict with our loved ones, we can say, you know what allows me to be here with you with this calm, even though I don't agree with you, is that I'm checking in with myself. I'm breathing in such a way that calms my body so that I can hear you, and so that I can say to you with calm and with respect that I don't agree with you. And then maybe take it to another level and say, how is that for you, that I can tell you that I don't agree with you and still let you know that I'm with you and that I love you and that I want to be in relationship with you? And I would leave it at that.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Episcopal bishop who did not agree earlier this week, and was, in my own experience of her, stating clearly what her truth was in the face, quite literally, of that disagreement with calm, with clarity, with power. Does that kind of get at? I mean,
Right. I'm assuming that she was very prayerful. Prayerful in the preparation, prayerful in the delivery, and aware of the risk that she was taking. This is Bishop, I don't know how to pronounce her name. Is it Budde? Budde? I don't know if that's how to pronounce her name. I want everybody to check it out. What she did was courageous beyond normal expressions of courage. Because, of course, someone in power has said, well, maybe she should be deported too. And so this is what you ask for mercy for the vulnerable, and then others say that maybe you should be deported. This is where we are. This is what's disorienting. And this is why we need to have practices to calm ourselves so that we can be as clear as she is and was on that day. Yeah.
If I may, Christina, so on Monday, we celebrated MLK Day, Martin Luther King Day.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you recall from your readings of MLK, Martin Luther King, that reminds you, that you can point to mindfulness as an example?
Well, yes. So I will say that during COVID, during the shutdown of COVID, I mean, there's still COVID, right? During the shutdown, I was in contemplation. I was feeling lonely. I was angry. How did we get here? Angry, afraid, all these things. And so I put my energies into writing. And this was for Casting Interest Net. And I got to a point in the writing where I said, I think I need to talk to Martin Luther King Jr. about what's going down. And so I wrote this chapter inspired by his book, Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And so I titled my chapter, Letter from a Chicago Condo. And the reason why I titled it in such a way is as it's indication of how far Black people in the United States have come and how proud I think he would have been. So Martin Luther King Jr. studied Thich Nhat Hanh's work, studied Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhist priest Thich Nhat Hanh, and nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. So Martin Luther King Jr. was aware of Buddhist thought, philosophy, and some of the practices. As it relates to the fact that we have this holiday, but also we have a president who is, I would say, and his party almost, how can I say, anti the values of the civil rights movement. Where does mindfulness play into that kind of, let's say, Martin Luther King Jr. civil rights movement ethos, if you will, or philosophy? It comes down to the fact, from that perspective anyway, that we are all interconnected. Right? We are caught up, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, in the inescapable network of our mutuality. So if you believe that, then it should give rise to a certain ethical obligation towards one another. The awareness, the mindfulness of our interconnection then leads to this other thought from Martin Luther King Jr., which was a threat to justice somewhere or anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And if you believe that, then we should ask ourselves in our mindfulness practices, mindfulness of the body, how do I want to use my body to refrain from harm and to promote healing? Refrain from harm, promote healing. That's how I want to use my body, because I am interconnected to everyone and everything. And when I do something that is unjust, it's going to impact someone else. I don't want to live my life that way. And from a Buddhist perspective, we say we try to live as blamelessly as possible. As blamelessly as possible, because of the causes and conditions of when we do the wrong thing, there's very likely to be a consequence. Some people call that karma, but a consequence that then we have to deal with because we have, I can say, compounded the negativity of our behavior.
I have another, Christina, if I may, one more question, and then we can also turn it to the audience afterwards if you wish. Do you see mindfulness in Christianity? Because I'm going to lay my cards out a little bit.
Okay.
I don't always see it in Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I find the judgment quite strong these days across the spectrum, the theological spectrum. But do you see any mindfulness perhaps that I'm not seeing at this time?
Yeah. I would say the contemplative traditions are practicing versions of mindfulness. And there's certainly in the Gospels, neurologists who study spiritual practices have said probably the main difference between practices like mindfulness and meditation and prayer is that not enough time is spent in prayer. In comparison, you need to extend the moments of prayer, get really deep into it for it to have the effect, the transforming effect people say it offers. So I'll leave it there for now. There's so much so much to get into.
Yes, I was not planning to ask a lot of questions, but then you got me thinking. So it's yeah, I think your last point on prayer has been is very insightful. I think yeah, I think I can see some hope. Many years ago I did the some of the Ignatius spirituality exercises, and I think that's a place that I can also agree with you. I think there's something there that could that brings you to that place of awareness, just the silence again, and so and sometimes I seek out silence these days simply to find where I am in this disoriented place in many different ways. And it could be many different ways of doing it, but yeah. But I'm also just very after November 7th. I do have to confess, I lost lots of hope of Christianity as a place to go to seek mindfulness. Because yes, I saw what just happened across this country, and now I'm re-seeking it in different ways. But to say that November 7th didn't have an impact would be naive on my part. And I'm aware that it has, and I suspect it has with many others as well. And so it's, but anyway, I think there's more commentary than anything, but you got me thinking a little bit more. So, Christina, Okay.
I want to give a shout out to the Quakers. Okay, for just a moment. I want to give a shout out to the Quakers, the silent Quaker meetings, as quiet, silent, spiritual practice that can be healing. So I'll leave that there for now.
Okay. Christina, you have any questions before we turn it over to the audience?
I've been just enjoying the conversation here, and absolutely, Ayo gets us to think, right, and to feel, and to be present with all that there is to think and to consider and feel. And so, for me, I am wondering in what ways to bridge some of what we've discussed already today around kind of personal practices that keep us aware, non-judgmental ways of being with others, and this conversation that's now emerged around kind of these communal, these communities of faith. And many of our viewers today, folks who may be in leadership roles within these communities, who, you know, people have opted in to participating in something that perhaps gives support, if not guidance, on how to navigate these disorienting times. I'm thinking about therapists who are practicing with folks who, you know, are looking to them to say, I'm triggered. I'm experiencing these times as distressing and really damaging and kind of depleting in all these different kinds of ways. And so I am wondering about how does one maybe offer guide and lead in this context from that place of mindfulness.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh my gosh. I love this question so much because it's the question. For me, it is the question. In this moment, that's the question for all of us, regardless of our faith leanings, regardless of the communities we are in. We are each being called to respond to the situation at hand. How do we do it? How do we lead? Okay. I don't know because I've never lived through this. First of all, I will say this. I've heard a lot of people say, don't worry so much. Don't despair, because we have lived through this before. I don't know if y'all heard anybody say that. I don't think that's helpful to say. You and I have not lived through this before. Who are the we you're talking about? Historically, there were people who lived through things similar to this. Okay, they're not alive right now. You and I have not lived through this. So let's stop with that mythology. Okay, now, since we haven't lived through this before, what are the strengths? My question would be, what are the strengths that you know you already have? You already have it. And how do you know it? And how have you applied it? Would you be willing to continue? If so, please just keep doing that. But also now, if you weren't doing this before, prepare the people you work with to be in leadership. Like for real, not just theoretically, not just with knowledge, like with relationship skills, with the counseling that's needed to regroup after you've been insulted many times, because you will be insulted. If you're standing up for justice and truth, you will be insulted. And that takes a toll. If writing is your strength, keep writing. If speaking out for people is what you do, keep doing that. And also pay particular attention to the various groups that are being targeted. For example, when Haitian immigrants were being targeted as people who eat the pets of their neighbors, where was the outcry around that? I don't know. I saw some, I heard it, but did people in Springfield or did people outside of Springfield go to say, no, 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 this is not acceptable? So I don't know what happened there, but I know that I trust there'll be more of that. An executive order was just signed that's reversing the status of, I think, Haitians, Venezuelans, Hondurans, and I think one other group, but not Ukrainians, right? I live near an Ukrainian village. I'm not saying Ukrainians should be targeted, not at all. I'm saying pay attention to the ways we discriminate against people of color and privileged white people. That's what's going down in this country, and we need to be able to say something about it at the risk of our well-being.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's turn it over to the audience, and I will show you the question on the screen here, and then take it off after it's shown. We have a question from Marilyn. Hello, thank you for sharing your insight and experience. I'm learning about Ubuntu, which seems to be an appropriate prism through which we can talk about healing from harm, finding forgiveness, and then peace. Is it also a channel for deeper mindfulness?
Good question. I would say that my understanding of Ubuntu is philosophical. So can the philosophy of Ubuntu lead to deeper mindfulness? I think it's, for me, it's mindfulness, deeper mindfulness and meditation practices that reveal the Ubuntu. So we can talk about it as an aspiration. I'm connected to you, you're connected to me. I am well if you are well, right? The interbeingness of it. But to really grok it, to really believe it, I think the revelation that comes from the lessening of our ego gratification is what reveals the Ubuntu-ness of our very being, our interconnection. Thank you for that question. I love that question.
Okay. We have another question from Neil. Are you familiar with the work of the late Dr. John B. Cobb Jr.? And if so, how does it play into some of your philosophy? I might add that in there.
Not enough to speak about it. I know a little bit about who he was, but I haven't read enough to be able to speak about. Yeah.
Okay. And let me turn it to a question I have, because I wanted to go back to the element that you talked a little bit about, historical past, when people have said, "Don't worry, it's going to pass." And the first thing that came to mind along some of that idea was some of the things that happened 100 years ago prior to World War II. I saw an article the other day. It took 53 days for Hitler to change the political scene in Germany, for example. I guess my question is more along the lines of, can we learn any? I guess there's part of me, the academic in me, wants to go back and say, how did the people respond back then? And to their turbulent times, to their disorienting age. And I think you sort of hinted to this a little bit. Where was the outrage outside Springfield? Where's the outrage? There seems to be some sort of a deflation happening right now, that people are probably burnt out or exhausted or maybe defeated, or I don't know. I guess, can we learn, I guess, in some ways, yes, I know people have gone through things in the past. Is there elements of, can we have an opportunity to learn and with regard to how they responded and perhaps try to respond in the present? I'm not quite sure if I'm making sense there, but it's.
I hear you, Francisco. I'm going to say something that's very pessimistic, maybe pessimistic, which is we knew what to do collectively and we didn't do it.
Mhm.
We don't have to go back to the past. Not that far back. We could go back to 2016 to 2020. It's not that long ago. And many people, millions of Americans, chose more of that. That's what we have to contend with. Number one, our memories are short, maybe. But two, the desire, and this is what took me by surprise, the desire for authoritarianism, the appetite for it in this country. That surprised me, not the racism, not the sexism. The appetite for authoritarianism is very strong in the United States right now. And until that becomes distasteful, we're not going to be able to deal with what is real. I remember back to Christina's question about how to be a leader, when I was writing one of my books, when it went up for peer review, one of the reviewers said that I had used the word fascism a few times. And that by using this book was under review in, I think, 2019. And that by using that word, I would be burning bridges. And and the point was not to burn the bridge, but it was also to speak the truth. And so the compromise was I would use it less, but I would not use it. Okay. And so the consequence of that is that people, because of the abuse of power, people who weren't fascist were being labeled as fascist, right? People who weren't Nazis in the United States, current history, were being called Nazis. Right? It's been flipped. And until we deal with what is right now, which also includes the fear of a Black woman in power, we're not going to be talking about anything that matters. We have not been here before because we have not had a president in this country that is anti-constitution, rich as hell, getting richer by the day, and rich in the business of defining our perceptions through the media. And so as long as we continue to feed that and consume that, this is why I say we're in such danger. Now, I know the topic, if y'all don't mind, I'm going to go to mental health for a moment, because maybe somebody signed up to hear something about that. If you don't feel well in this moment, you should not be feeling great in this moment. You have many reasons to feel afraid, to have feelings of anxiety, despair, depression, terror. It depends. It just depends on what you're focused on, what you're hearing, and what your psychological makeup is already. Francisco, you talked about after the election, you didn't have hope in what you were seeing about Christians. We can't let that situation define what Christianity is and the potential for it, the potential within it. So I would say give yourself permission to increase care for your psychological well-being. I remember having a conversation not long ago with scholars, and I said, I don't think that we know how to offer pastoral care in the age of an authoritarian government. That's what we need to do. That we need to talk about that, and we can't go on business as usual because people are going to be ill as a result of this.
Yeah, wonderful. We have a question from, let me see, from Tawanda Wallace. In my ministry context, working as staff chaplain at a hospital, how can I bring mindfulness practices with my colleagues?
Tawanda, I want to say this. Let's think back to when COVID was discovered and people were doing their darndest in the hospitals to take care of each other. Let's go back to the memories of when medical professionals had to go out into the streets, literally into the streets, and beg people to avoid spreading the virus. Do y'all remember that? And now we want more of the policies that led to that kind of crisis. Practicing mindfulness in healthcare situations will go, I think, a long way towards team building. And so how do you do it? You just offer it. First of all, be an example of how mindfulness works in your life and in your ministry. That's the first thing. Because if you're if you're out of control and you're talking about mindfulness, no one's going to believe you, right? So, but if in your life, you're an example of how mindfulness works in your body, in your speech, in your mind, in your clarity, then people might be attracted to that, because guess what? Chaos is coming back into healthcare systems. And unfortunately, those who have been offered to lead our public health care systems are not credible public health care professionals. So there will be chaos. I applaud you for wanting to bring calm. Make the invitation.
How about what would you say then? Here at CTS, we have a number of students who are studying and training to become therapists. If you switch the context from ministry context to, let's say, a counseling context or a therapist context, would the same reflection sustain itself, I guess, in terms of how can we bring mindfulness practices within our therapy practices?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Should I answer that question, or should Dr. Christina answer that question?
I would love to hear your perspective. I really truly believe that a lot of it does transfer, namely, this idea that the therapist's own kind of, their own central nervous system being calm is something that the client borrows from in real time, that it is a healing element in and of itself. And so to the extent that a therapist has their own practices that they're embodying, we are able to kind of work from that. But I would love to hear kind of your perspective as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then I would say this, which is, I don't know how you're defining ministry at CTS, but it seems to me that as a pastoral counselor, that counseling is the ministry to the person. It's not the evangelizing of the person. It's a ministry to that person. It is providing the attention, the space, the privacy, the pause, the contemplation for someone to just be, hopefully be in a relaxation mode, able to say what they want to say, hear themselves say it, and be in relationship with someone who's like, I can receive it all. I can receive you as you are, all of you, every time. If that's not like a ministry to the person or to the couple or the family, I don't know what is.
I don't know what is. Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.
Right. Yeah.
You have one. Let's see. Can you hear me okay now? Okay. But prior to this, I talked a little bit about family a little bit. And many of us have family, howsoever you construe that, understand family. And one of the things I've struggled with a lot is, and I love this. This is very helpful, at least for me. I've learned a lot here. But for example, I have a couple of 20-year-olds who, and I know many of us have other family members, whether it's children or maybe you're taking care of a mother or someone along those lines, or a brother or whatnot. But for those who do you see a difference in terms of generations is what I'm trying to get at. Is there something different that you provide children, young adults, or elderly, something different, or is it something? Is the message the same for these? Yeah.
Francisco, because you were muted, I didn't hear what you said before.
Okay.
But I'll answer briefly in this way. From a Buddhist perspective, we often say that that the Buddha taught in a way that his particular audience could understand it. Right? So it is with people in different age groups at different developmental stages, no matter their age. We try to speak to where they are able to cognize, understand, and engage at their level.
Okay.
And I would say that's also across cultures as well. It would be practice humility, and really try to get to where that person is and speak there.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Christina, you have a final question for our guest or comment?
Well, my final comment is thankfulness and gratitude for our guest sharing your wisdom, your insight, your lived theology, your lived practice with us today. We are all better. We are all helpfully jostled and encouraged for what it is that you've provided us today. And so thank you so much. And I also just want to let folks know that they can kind of connect and learn more about you. What's the best way to connect with your work?
Thank you. So I have a website, Pamela Ayo Yetunde, my full name spelled out, .com. And then I have one final thing. I have a request, which is Christians who love people, who care, for whom Jesus matters. Speak up. Speak up, show up, tell us who you are, so we all can be inspired to get through this thing. We got to get through this thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of CTS, thank you. And I'm looking at a lot of the live chat, and when someone says it, wow, thank you for bringing wisdom to us at this critical time. Thank you.